Hey guys, if you're new here, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss a video. Like, share, and comment your thoughts on today's story. Also, what kind of stories do you want next? Quick question. What would you do if you were in this situation? Let me know in the comments. I woke to the sound of oil crackling softly in a pan. For one suspended second, I forgot where I was. Then the scent reached me. Plantains, pepper, butter. And something warm underneath it all. Something that smelled dangerously close to home, even though home had never once smelled like this. I stared at the unfamiliar ceiling above me, pale gray concrete cut through with recessed amber lighting, and slowly remembered the previous night. The rain, the broken wine glass, her laughter. The impossible woman currently standing in my kitchen as if she belonged there. I pushed a hand over my face and checked the time. 5:42 a.m. Nobody cooked in my penthouse at 5:42 a.m. Nobody stayed long enough to know where the pans were. Nobody acted comfortable inside my space. Yet there she was. I rose quietly and walked barefoot toward the kitchen. The city beyond the floor-to-ceiling windows was still half asleep, Seoul draped in blue dawn haze and silver rain. 47 floors below, traffic lights blinked across wet intersections like restless stars. She stood at the stove in one of my black shirts. Nothing else had ever looked that good in my apartment. Amara didn't turn around when she heard me. "I had a long night," I said roughly. "I know," she replied calmly. "I guess my love is cooking something in the kitchen." The words should have sounded ridiculous. Instead, they landed somewhere low in my chest and stayed there. She glanced over her shoulder. "I woke up early to make you breakfast because I know you'll be hungry," she said. "And you didn't eat last night." I leaned against the marble counter and watched her. She had somehow found plantains I didn't remember buying. Found eggs. Found a single Scotch bonnet pepper hidden somewhere in the back of the refrigerator. And now she was moving around my kitchen with terrifying confidence, humming quietly to herself while using my extremely expensive induction stovetop like she'd owned it for years. There was something deeply intimate about watching someone cook in silence. More intimate than sex, maybe. Sex was easy. Cooking required trust, memory, care. She plated the food with unnecessary precision before finally pointing toward the dining table. "Sit down," I obeyed. That realization disturbed me more than it should have. Park Jihan did not obey people. Men twice my age shook when I entered rooms. Government officials called before speaking publicly. Entire companies rearranged themselves around my decisions. Yet somehow this woman from Accra could point at a chair while holding a spatula, and I sat automatically like a disciplined schoolboy. She placed the plate in front of me. Fried sweet plantains. Egg stew, toast, tea. I stared at it. Something shifted inside me with quiet violence. "My mother's recipe," she said, taking the seat across from me. "Any man worth feeding deserves real food." No performance, no seduction, no self-consciousness, just honesty. She ate calmly while morning light spilled across the table between us. I picked up the fork. The first bite nearly destroyed me, not because it was extravagant, because it was. It tasted homemade, human. The kind of food someone makes when they expect you to come back tomorrow. I looked up slowly. She was watching me with soft amusement. "Well," I cleared my throat, "it's good." Her eyes narrowed. "That's the response of a man emotionally repressed by capitalism." I laughed before I could stop myself, actually laughed. The sound startled both of us. She smiled then, small, victorious. And God help me, I wanted to see that smile again for the rest of my life. We ate quietly after that, comfortably, which was somehow even more dangerous. Rain tapped softly against the glass, while dawn spread over the city in pale silver streaks. She told me stories between bites, about her mother's house in Accra, about cousins constantly sleeping on couches, about aunties arguing loudly over seasoning techniques like international diplomats negotiating peace treaties, about Sunday afternoons full of noise and music and food and children running through rooms while adults shouted from kitchens. "Every surface had something on it," she said with a smile. Photographs, cloth, bowls, shoes, someone's purse, somebody's baby. I listened carefully. Hungry people listen differently. They memorize. I realized halfway through her story that I was memorizing the sound of her voice. I remember when my mom used to take us places, I admitted quietly. Home was fun back then. She looked at me gently. You miss your home. The statement settled heavily between us. I stared at the steam rising from my tea. Yes, then why don't you go back? Because home no longer existed. Because the people who built it were dead. Because Seoul had turned me into something useful and frightening, and impossible to untangle from the empire I had created. But I didn't say any of that. Instead, I asked, you miss Ghana every single day. Then why stay here? She set down her fork, looked at me steadily. Because I'm not done yet. Something tightened in my chest. Done with what? She gestured vaguely around herself. This. That clears up absolutely nothing. She laughed softly. I came here to finish my degree and prove something, she said. And I haven't proven it yet. To who? Myself. I leaned back slightly. And if something here made you want to stay? The question slipped out before I could stop it. Silence. The rain softened outside. She looked at me for a long moment. Then she picked up her tea again. Ask me something easier. I should have pushed. Instead, I let the silence remain. And that restraint changed everything between us. Because she looked at me afterward like she had expected pressure and found patience instead. Nobody had ever looked at me like that before. 3 weeks later, the truth arrived. Not dramatically, not with screaming, not with guns. The most devastating truths almost never arrive dramatically. They arrive sideways, quietly. In ordinary moments, like finding a crack in a wall you've leaned against for months. She was in my study when it happened. I was in Singapore handling a negotiation involving shipping routes, encrypted financial transfers, and a senator whose greed exceeded his intelligence. Ming Jun had spent 72 hours preparing for the meeting, which meant it mattered. Amara had stayed behind in the penthouse, reading. She liked sitting in my study because of the view. Or at least that's what she claimed. Personally, I suspected she liked the silence. The tablet on my desk lit up while she was reading. One message, one mistake, one moment that changed everything. Surveillance update attached. Her name beneath it. Amara Afori, active file. She opened it, and the world she had carefully built around herself began to crack apart. By the time I returned to Seoul 6 hours later, the city looked exactly the same. But something fundamental had shifted. I felt it before I entered the penthouse. The silence was wrong. Most people think danger announces itself loudly. It doesn't. Real danger feels still. The elevator doors opened. Amara sat in my reading chair near the windows, hands folded neatly in her lap. Perfect posture, perfect stillness. The tablet rested on the desk beside her. Open, I stopped walking. She looked up at me, and I knew instantly. She knew. Interesting thing about fear. Most people imagine it as panic. For men like me, fear arrives cold, precise, calculating. My mind assessed possibilities immediately. How much had she seen? What had she understood? Who had she contacted? Could this still be controlled? Then she spoke, and every calculation I had vanished. I need to tell you something. Not defensive, not manipulative. Just honest, which somehow terrified me more. I loosened my tie slowly. Okay, she inhaled carefully. Then she told me everything. London, the businessman. The hard drive she accidentally discovered while cleaning his townhouse. The intelligence officers who approached her afterward. The agreement she signed. The operation. The placement. Me. Every word arrived direct and unsoftened. No excuses. No dramatics. No attempt to make herself look innocent. And somehow that honesty hurt worse than deception would have. Because it meant she respected me enough not to lie. When she finished speaking, silence flooded the room. She looked exhausted, not physically, spiritually. Like someone who had carried a weight too long and finally set it down only to realize the damage it caused. I stood near the doorway without moving. The city lights reflected faintly across the windows behind her. How long? I asked quietly. Have you known about the file? 6 hours. I shook my head once. Not your file. Confusion flickered across her face. The file on you. Silence. Then understanding hit her slowly. You knew. I walked toward the windows, hands clasped behind my back. I run the largest intelligence network in Southeast Asia, I said calmly. Did you really believe I failed to investigate the woman entering my home? She stared at me. I knew your agency was compromised 18 months ago, I continued. I knew British intelligence placed assets through it. You knew what I was. I knew what they hoped you would become. The room felt very quiet, very fragile. She rose slowly from the chair. And you still let me stay, I laughed once, softly, without humor. At first, I told myself it was strategic. But I looked at her then, really looked at her. The woman who left tea beside my desk during long nights. The woman who mocked my inability to rest. The woman who filled empty spaces in my apartment with music and warmth and impossible humanity. But then you laughed at me, I admitted. Her expression shifted slightly. You argued with me, you cooked in my kitchen, you sat beside me while I worked like you belonged there. My voice lowered. And somewhere along the way, I stopped caring why you came. She swallowed hard. You should hate me. I tried. That startled her. I am exceptionally good at hatred, I said quietly. I built half my empire using it. Then why? Because every time I looked at you, I interrupted softly. I saw someone trying very hard to stay good in situations designed to destroy that. Her eyes shone suddenly. And God, that nearly ruined me. I never gave them anything, she whispered. Not really. I know, you knew. Amara, I said tiredly, if you had betrayed me, you would not still be alive. The truth landed heavily between us, not cruel, just factual. She closed her eyes briefly, then nodded once. Fair, I moved closer slowly, not enough to touch her, just enough that the space between us changed. So what now? She asked. Outside, Seoul glittered beneath the rain. Inside, two people stood surrounded by layers of deception neither fully understood how to untangle. I considered the possibilities carefully. You can call your handler, I said. Tell him I discovered everything. They'll extract you. Your agreement ends, you go home safe. And the other option, my gaze held hers. I handle the British problem myself. A small laugh escaped her. That sentence is terrifying. It should be. And then, you stay, the word hung between us. She stared at me silently. Not as staff, I clarified. Not as an asset, not as some arrangement. Then what? I had negotiated billion-dollar deals without hesitation. Threatened men powerful enough to collapse governments. Ordered operations that altered economies. Yet somehow this next sentence felt more dangerous than all of those things combined. As Amara Afori, I said quietly, the woman who saw me clearly and stayed anyway. Her breathing changed slightly. I continued before courage disappeared. The only person in years who entered this apartment and made it feel inhabited instead of occupied. Something in her face broke open then. Not sadness, something warmer, more terrifying. Love, maybe. She stepped closer. You're very dramatic for someone emotionally constipated. I laughed again. God, that laugh. What had she done to me? We'll need rules, she said carefully. Rules, yes, if I stay, I nodded once. Reasonable. You tell me what your empire actually does. That's a broad category. All of it. I blinked slowly. You want operational transparency? I want honesty. The simplicity of that answer hit harder than threats ever could. Honesty, such a small word, such catastrophic consequences. I studied her face and realized with startling clarity that I would probably give her anything she asked for. Dangerous realization. Potentially fatal. Absolutely true. Agreed, I said quietly. She exhaled, then finally crossed the remaining distance between us. Not dramatic, not cinematic, just real. Two exhausted people standing in amber light after dismantling every lie between them. Her fingers slid into mine. Warm, steady, certain. I looked down at our hands linked together, and understood suddenly why empires collapse. Not because enemies destroy them, because eventually something arrives that matters more than control. Outside, Seoul burned silver beneath the rain. Inside the penthouse, the most feared man in the city stood holding hands with the woman sent to betray him. And for the first time in years, neither of us felt alone. The British handler called the next morning. Amara stared at the phone vibrating across the marble kitchen island while I made coffee behind her. "You're disturbingly calm," she said. "I've survived assassination attempts," I replied. "This barely qualifies as stressful," she glared at me. "You are not helping." "I rarely do." The phone continued vibrating. Handler. She inhaled slowly before answering. "Hello," a man's voice filtered faintly through the speaker. "Miss Ofori, status update." Her eyes met mine briefly. I leaned casually against the counter sipping coffee like we were discussing weather instead of international espionage. "He knows," she said. Silence. "Then clarify. He found the operation." Another silence, longer this time. "What level of exposure?" "All of it." The handler swore quietly. I almost respected him for it. "Can you extract safely?" Amara looked at me again. Something soft passed between us. "No." Pause. "Are you compromised?" Interesting question. She straightened slightly. "No," she answered calmly. "I'm choosing." That got his attention. "Miss Ofori, you told me this would remain passive," she interrupted. "You lied. This is bigger than you understand." "I understand enough." Her voice sharpened now. "For 2 years, I've let governments convince me morality is flexible when powerful people need things. I'm done participating." I watched her carefully. Admiration bloomed inside my chest with dangerous intensity. The handler's tone hardened. "You signed an agreement, and you exploited someone scared enough to sign it." Silence again. Then colder, "You are making a serious mistake." I finally spoke. "Actually," I said mildly, "she's making an excellent decision." Dead silence exploded through the line. Amara covered her face briefly. "Oh my God." The handler recovered first. "Mr. Park, good morning. What exactly is happening there?" I glanced at Amara. She looked horrified. I smiled slightly. "We're having breakfast." The call ended 37 seconds later. Amara stared at me. "You are insane. I've been told that. You intentionally spoke." "Yes." "Why?" I took another sip of coffee. "Because now they know 2 things. And those are," I looked at her steadily, "that you are under my protection." Pause. "And that I know exactly who they are." Her expression changed slowly. "You're declaring war." "No," I corrected gently. "I'm establishing boundaries." She laughed despite herself, then immediately looked distressed about laughing. "You enjoy this entirely too much." "I enjoy competence." That was terrifying. That, I informed her, was diplomacy. 3 months later, she moved officially into the penthouse. Not because I asked, because one evening she walked into the apartment carrying 3 suitcases and announced, "Your closet organization system is offensive." I looked up from my laptop. "My what?" "You organize clothing by color." "Yes, that's psychotic behavior. It's efficient. It's emotionally alarming." Then she kissed my forehead and started reorganizing my entire life. I watched from the couch, completely helpless. Ming Jun arrived halfway through the chaos and froze in the doorway. Amara stood inside my closet directing movers with terrifying authority. Sweaters were apparently being relocated according to texture now. Ming Jun looked at me carefully. "Sir." "Yes." "Are we under attack?" I considered the question seriously. "Possibly." Amara pointed toward a shelf. "No, those shoes go there." The movers obeyed instantly. Ming Jun watched this happen, then looked back at me. "You let her reorganize the penthouse." "Yes." "She called your filing system embarrassing." "Yes." "She told security your emotional range resembles cold oatmeal." I sighed quietly. "Yes." A long silence. Then Ming Jun nodded slowly like a man finally understanding the fall of ancient civilizations. "I see." No, he absolutely did not, because the truth was much worse. I was happy, hopelessly, ridiculously happy, and every day afterward only made it worse. She filled the apartment with life, music while cooking, books stacked everywhere, blankets draped across furniture, tiny handwritten notes left beside my laptop. Eat something, sleep tonight. You looked homicidal during breakfast. Normal people do not survive entirely on espresso. The penthouse changed around her. So did I. The empire remained. The danger remained. The violence remained. But somehow inside all of it there was now warmth, a center point, a home. One rainy evening nearly a year later, we stood together beside the windows overlooking Seoul. She rested against my chest while the city glittered beneath us. You know, she murmured thoughtfully, this entire relationship started because I broke a wine glass. I kissed the top of her head. Yes, and technically I was spying on you. Badly, she laughed softly. You knew immediately? First week. That is deeply humiliating. You left fingerprints on a classified file. I was nervous. You also asked my head of security if he needed therapy. He clearly does. I smiled against her hair. Silence settled warmly around us. Then she tilted her head back slightly. Any regrets? I looked out across the city I once ruled alone. Then down at the woman holding my heart with terrifying casualness. No, I said honestly. None at all.